Hello everyone, she's here. Let's get started. Okay, I'm not even like going to waste my time with too much introduction because this video is going to be like super long as it is, and the more I ramble, the more I'm going to have to like cut out from this video. So let's just dive right into the palettes, shall we? As a lot of you know, I ordered on release day the Huetopian Dream Mothership 9 palette together with the new Intensifeyes in a little set that she was selling on the website. It was very surprising because the set together cost 140 euros. The palette itself was 135. I just wanted to throw in very quickly for my friends here who are in Europe and might be experiencing a shock seeing the new prices on the McGrath Labs website. I believe that is because of the changed EU regulations regarding import and customs. If you live in the Netherlands, what you see on the price is the total price of what you're paying, including like customs and everything. So when you pay, this is it. You don't have to pay anything once it arrives in the Netherlands. So if by any chance you do, you need to request a refund from McGrath Labs. Now, speaking of refund, let's very quickly talk about Pat's non-existent express shipping once again, because it's not McGrath Labs first impressions video from Mariam if she doesn't rant about the shipping. I have finally figured out what the spiel with her express shipping is, okay? Once she ships the product, it comes in really quickly because the product was shipped to me like 3 or 4 days ago because it comes with a DHL Express. However, Pat makes no promises about actually shipping out the product quickly, and I think that is where it goes wrong. Either way, I've already emailed with customer service. They've already refunded me the $20 or 17 euros which I paid for express shipping because it's like almost weeks later. This is not express shipping. So let's just dig into the palette, you guys. The first thing I'm going to do is, because I haven't even swatched the eyeshadows myself, I am going to swatch them here with you, although I'm sure if you are anything like me, you've already seen 100 videos with this eyeshadow palette. But I want to swatch the eyeshadows for myself. I was going to do 2 different eye looks, as I usually do when I do a first impressions video, and I'm not really doing anything after that, which is the case today. But I want to compare the Intensifeyes to another glitter glue type product that I have, which I think calls for doing the same eye look on both eyes so that we can fairly compare the 2 products. In the end of the video, I am going to have probably a lot of comparison swatches. If you have never been on my channel before and you were wondering what I thought of this release, because I already spoke about it some videos ago, I don't want to ramble about it too much for those of you who have already seen that video and know my opinion. But overall, what I wanted to say is I was not as shocked as others were to see the inside of this palette, because when Pat started teasing this palette, there was a lot of like rainbow and kawaii and pastel vibes, and people were expecting some sort of like a pastel rainbow eyeshadow palette. And knowing Pat McGrath's aesthetic and the aesthetic of her core, you know, target audience, I didn't really expect that we were going to get a super colorful pastel eyeshadow palette. I thought we were going to get something exactly like Huetopian Dream. The only thing that I was a little bit puzzled by was the, again, overwhelming presence of pink in the promo images, as well as in the first images we got of the palette. Now, in the meantime, I've watched a couple of videos, and I can't wait to swatch the eyeshadows myself, but at this point I feel like I'm getting more coral vibes from this palette than I am really getting pink vibes from it. I think there is very little pink representation in here. I did want to throw in a couple of words about the packaging, because I think the packaging is so flipping beautiful. I don't know whether you have already looked at yours, but there are so many little beautiful details in here. There's like the little like spacecraft, like a UFO over here, and I love the overall design of like this sort of like crown with the golden like angel wings and the little like golden microphone and the classic glitter red lips from Pat McGrath. I just think it's such a cool packaging, and my first association was like 70s disco, and my husband actually added cyber to the description, so I think cyber disco is a pretty accurate description of what I feel like this outer packaging represents. I did notice something new about the packaging, by the way. It now comes with like a little plastic protector over here. So if you are someone who is really bothered by your black eyeshadow palettes gathering a lot of fingerprints on them, then you can keep yours on if you want. I'm going to remove mine because I want to enjoy this eyeshadow palette in its full glory, and I don't really care that it collects all kinds of things. It just shows wear and tear, and it means that I have loved it. You guys have already seen the inside of this palette so many times, but let me just show it to you completely untouched. A virgin, one might say. Now, like I said, when it comes to the insides of this palette, I look at it and once again, I don't really actually see that much pink in it, because sans this shade over here, which is a true like subdued dusty pink, the rest of the shades are actually not very pink at all. So I am very curious to swatch them and experience them firsthand. One thing again I wanted to add before I forget, something that I want to criticize the brand for, is that they have snuck this shade in here. This is the Triochrome shade, the Blitz Extreme shade. Blitz Extreme is not in her special formula, okay? It's a regular metallic eyeshadow, which you can tell by the fact that it has the little like round pan. Usually her baked shades, which you can tell from these three over here, don't really have a metal pan around them because they're like the baked gelée formula that is like made directly somehow into the pan. I'm not sure how that works. But what I wanted to say is I'm not mad that we get less special shades. Of course I'm disappointed. I would rather get 4 or more rather than less. But what I do find really sneaky is that she calls it a Blitz. And usually those titles like the Blitz, the VR and the Astral are really reserved for the baked shades. And that she's calling a regular eyeshadow Blitz and sneaking it into the corner over here, I am not on board with that. If she had called it Extreme without the Blitz in it, I would have been like, okay, fair and square, you're calling it just a regular name, so just a regular eyeshadow. But don't call it Blitz VR or Astral if it's not that, because I think that's very misleading. I don't understand this choice because to me the VR formula on Sextraterrestrial in the Divine Rose 2 palette, which is the first triochrome she introduced in her eyeshadow palette lineup, is a beautiful formula. I don't understand why she felt the need to change it. I heard from a couple of people that they found that the metallic formula works better with like blending out, and I was like, do we have the same eyeshadow palettes? Because to me VR Sextraterrestrial is such a gorgeous formula. It's so easy to blend out, such a like foolproof formula. But anyway, I did want to make it a point to mention that, and also to mention that I'm not really on board with the naming of this eyeshadow. I don't mind that it's a metallic, I do mind however that it's called something that it's not. So, without further ado, I'm just going to swatch the eyeshadows for you, and I'm going to do it in rows. So I'm going to start with the upper row, ending here with the special shades, and I'm going to continue with the lower row, again adding on in the corner of the Bliss shades. So the first shade is Skin Show Nude Ecstasy. Right next to it we have the Dusty Rose, which is called Secret Eden. So here is the swatch for the Skin Show shade. The Skin Show shade this time is a somewhat deeper, like peachy beige. And over here we have the Dusty Rose, which I'm not gonna lie, even though it's a pink and I'm tired of seeing pinks, I actually really like this eyeshadow. This is one of the most like muted and neutral pinks that she has ever released, and this is an eyeshadow that I can get a lot of use out of. Okay, starting off with Bronze Desire. Bronze Desire is a gorgeous bronzy shade with somewhat warmer undertones to it. Then we have one of the special shades. This is Bronze Solaris 005, which in terms of formula so much reminds me of the bronze shade in the Sublime palette, which we're definitely going to swatch next to this one. And of course we have Astral Venusian Orchid, which is one of the most spectacular shades in this eyeshadow palette. It is a gorgeous lavender shifting to like a lime green, gold yellow. Such a cool eyeshadow. Starting off with Extreme Plum Noir, which is the plummy brown in this eyeshadow palette. It is the deepest matte shade. It's not the deepest out there, but I feel like it's deep enough if you have a somewhat lighter to medium skin tone. Then we have Cosmic Bloom, which is a gorgeous coral peachy red duochrome shade. Such a beautiful shade. Then we have the shade which was the most confusing on her photos because it looks like a hot pink, but it's actually a hot coral. This is the shade Shockwave. As you can tell, this is quite the punchy shade. And last but not least we have Blitz Extreme, which is the multi-chrome. This is like a warm red maroon with, I think it's better to actually look at it here. It is like a peachy red maroon with a very dark olive green lime base. Such a beautiful shade. And last but not least, we have another one of the most spectacular shades in this eyeshadow palette, which is Astral Amethyst Moon, which is a lavender shifting to like an icy blue. So here you have once again the swatches of all of the eyeshadows in this palette. Are they beautiful? Yes, they're beautiful. Am I disappointed? Not at all. Looking at it now, I honestly don't think that there's anything pink in this eyeshadow palette, except for that Dusty Rose, which is also such a muted shade that it can almost pass as more of a neutral rather than a pink shade. So trust me, if you thought this is Divine Rose 3, you would be wrong. This is a whole new species of its own. This leans much more coral and maroon peachy than anything else, and I cannot wait to put it on my eyeballs. I want to do so many things with this eyeshadow palette. I'm already so inspired by it, but we have to start somewhere, so I am going to start off with like one look today, and we're going to do a bajillion others in the near future. I'm going to start with this shade, the shade Secret Eden, and I'm going to put that all over the inner part of my crease. And then on the outer part of my crease I'm going to put the hot coral shade, the shade Shockwave. See, I told you, this is such a nice shade. This is such a like useful shade for me. The very cool toned, like lilac-y, not lilac-y, mauvey, purpley, pinky shade that we have in Divine Rose 1 is so cool toned that it almost looks unflattering on me, so I don't really use it very often. The hot pinks that she has released, while they're beautiful and stunning, and I think they're fun to wear every now and then, I think they're just too stark for someone with my skin tone, and I rarely use them, so I don't really need as many as I do. This kind of pink I can work with. I can use this shade so much. Now I'm going to very gently go into the shade Shockwave, the coral, because that looks like a shade that is a little neon. So I'm going to have to build this up in very small increments, and actually this is already more than sufficient for my liking. I like coral shades, but I find the two neon ones to just be once again too stark for me. So far this is just regular good old Pat McGrath formula. It feels exactly like the last few motherships that we have gotten with this very like soft and blendable formula. I think the only different matte formula that she has was running up until Bronze Seduction, where the shades are still slightly more stiff and difficult to work with, but post Midnight Sun everything has been in this particular formula. It's very soft, it's very blendable, it's a little bit dusty, but that also makes it very easy to manipulate. I am going to take the deepest shade in the palette, the shade Extreme Plum Noir, and apply it in my outer corner. And so far I can tell you for sure that Secret Eden shade, the dusty pink we put in the inner part of my crease, this is going to be one of my most used shades, matte shades from Pat McGrath. I can assure you of that. You're going to see this shade a lot in my videos from now on, because it's such a basic but useful shade. I love it. Now Extreme Plum Noir, even though it doesn't look like it's a very deep shade, at least on me is able to apply like or build to be quite to get quite a bit of depth. If you have a deeper skin tone, I'm very curious what you think about this shade, because it is not the deepest matte we have ever gotten from Pat, but for my personal standards this is perfect. I don't necessarily always need a very deep shade for like more everyday looks. I actually gravitate more towards shades that have this kind of depth, not too stark. Love this. It's blending out beautifully. I don't really know why she calls it a plum. I don't really, well, maybe it has a slightly plummy undertone to it, but it's mostly just a very beautiful mid-tone brown. It has such a beautiful undertone. Sometimes people like will be very critical of brown shades, but I actually like to see the different types of undertones you can achieve with a brown shade, and I do find some of them to be so much more unique and interesting than you might think if you look at them just in a swatch or in a pan. Okay, so for this next part it's going to get interesting because I want to get into the comparison between my usual glitter glue, which is Pixie Epoxy from Firini, versus the new product from McGrath Labs, which is called Intensifeyes. Now, people have been going bonkers over this, thinking this is going to be some sort of like a magical wand which transforms eyeshadow, and I've seen a couple of reviews, people seem to be super in love with it, but it seems to me like they're overreacting because you can literally achieve the same effect if you apply a glitter glue. Maybe for some people this is going to be an easier format to apply the product, but I don't find these types of glitter glues too difficult to work with. I've worked with ones, a variety actually, for years, and I think they're fabulous products. I always use my glittery and metallic shades over a glitter glue, so to me the effect that they are able to achieve now with this pen is old news, you know. I've seen this before and it's nothing spectacular to me. I'm just curious how this performs. I'm quickly going to put on the screen somewhere the ingredients of Intensifeyes because it was difficult to find out what exactly is in this product, but basically it's a glycerin based product, which essentially means that it works like a good old glitter glue. I am of course very curious how it's going to compare to epoxy, but just by comparison I wanted to say Pixie Epoxy has been around for maybe over a decade at this point. It is by an indie brand called Firini. This is 9 milliliters, costs $7, especially if you're in the US. This is quite affordable. Maybe they've raised the price a little bit by now, but I'm not really sure. It's probably not above $10. If you want to, at least once upon a time they used to offer a sample size of that so that you can try it out and see if it's something for you. I've tested a variety of different glitter glues over my indie makeup career, and this is the one that I always went back to because it is the most effective one. It is also the most finicky one to get used to. You have to be very, very careful to apply the smallest amount, but once you get used to this product, honestly you can never go back to not using this product. By comparison, the Intensifeyes from McGrath Labs is only 2 grams of product. It's 2 grams, right? Yeah, it's only 2 grams, and it's 34 euros, which is really expensive. And the format that it comes in is this pen, which basically you have to click to get the product up, from what I understand. So I think what I'm going to do first is I'm going to apply on one of my lids just Pixie Epoxy, the way I usually do. I just take the tiniest bit on the back of my hand, I kind of work it like this into my finger. I really take a very, very thin amount of that, thin layer, excuse me, and I apply it basically over top of the lid where I want to apply my metallics. I don't use this with matte shades. These types of products are meant to be used with metallics and glittery types of shades so that they provide stick. Matte shades are just going to like turn really weird on you, so I really don't recommend that you do that. Now the next thing I'm going to do is, I don't know whether it's going to work, I'm going to apply a bit of this shade over top of like the half of my lid, and then I'm going to apply Astral Venusian Orchid over top of that, and I'm going to put this one into my inner corners because I think it looks bomb as an inner corner highlight. I always use my fingers to apply metallic shades, so I'm just going to do that now as well. This is applying beautifully as one would expect. I'm going to actually apply most of it here onto the center of the lid so that I have some space where I can have this shade on its own and then the Astral Venusian Orchid over top and on its own. So I'm going to pop Astral Venusian Orchid right here onto the more like inner portion of the lid and a little bit over top of Cosmic Bloom. Wow, that shade is really spectacular. Now Cosmic Bloom is also really beautiful. I see a lot of sparkles coming from that shade alone, and of course the Astral Venusian Red is like a freaking party. It's so pretty. Last but not least, I'm going to take a tiny brush like this and go into Astral Amethyst Moon, and I'm going to apply that here into the inner corner. It's a bit of a crazy look, and honestly it's mostly a look that I'm doing to test as many eyeshadows as I can, but okay, this is a party as well. It's so interesting. This is more of like a magenta purple. It's a very like vibrant, the base of this shade is a very vibrant purple, and that blue, silver blue duochrome over top, it's just... And now for science, we are going to go in with the pen. I'm going to click out a little bit of that Nothing's coming out. Is this broken? Okay, I'm not going to get too much out. I'm just going to start off with this tiny bit because from what I understand you cannot really like push it back. Also, I don't really like to apply this kind of product straight onto the lid because you're going to get the tip of this dirty. So I am going to just take a bit on my finger and transfer it that way onto the lid, although I'm not really sure how effective that will be compared to just popping the whole thing onto the lid, but okay. Okay, so far I don't really detect any difference in terms of how this is applying in comparison to my usual glitter glue, because I'm used to using that type of product. To me, the way these eyeshadows apply now over top of the pen is really just SOP. But I do think it's a very smart move of her to include that type of product in her lineup, because I know people have been struggling with those like flaky types of shades because they will cause a lot of fallout if you don't have something that they can grip onto. So good move for Pat McGrath. I personally am going to continue sticking to more affordable options of this type of product because I just don't feel like 2 grams and 34 euros is a reasonable price for me when I know that stuff like Pixie Epoxy exists out there. So with that said, I'm going to continue using both of these products for probably a very long time because they take a really long time to finish up, but I'm glad that I was able to do the comparison, and I think it's pretty convincing that both of these applied the same. You are obviously going to be really impressed if you're not familiar with glitter glue types of products and you think that the liquid glitter glues are very difficult and finicky to work with. Maybe the pen will be something that you will find easier, but personally I don't really see that much of a difference in terms of performance. So if you're on a budget and you want a similar product, just go for Pixie Epoxy. I'm going to, on the lower lash line, go back into the Extreme Plum Noir shade and just apply the tiniest bit of that over here in the outer corners, but like only in the very outer corners because I want to do something fun on the rest of the lower lash line. I'm going to take the pen and I'm going to shove it right here on my lower lash line as a base for the next shade I want to use, which would be this beautiful bronzy shade over here, the shade Bronze Desire. And this is basically going to just make Bronze Desire stick very easily to my lower lash line and not fly all over my eyeballs. Usually when I do this with lower lash line shades, I will spritz my brush with Fix Plus, but I feel like the pen might be another good solution for that because the eyeshadow is sticking really nicely. If it weren't for this first impression video, I probably wouldn't have gone in with this many shades because I feel like with eyeshadows like the special shades from Pat McGrath and something more complex like this shade here, Cosmic Bloom, you need to let them shine, you need to let them have a moment in order to be able to fully appreciate them. But I wanted to show you as many eyeshadows as I possibly could in one eye look. And now we're going to proceed to the comparison swatches. So the first eyeshadow that I want to swatch ASAP is the shade Bronze Solaris, so this one over here, because I feel like it reminds me so much of the bronze shade in the Sublime palette, the Mothership 2, so I cannot wait to swatch them side by side. It's one of those eyeshadows that unfortunately applies horribly over bare skin, and you can see my attempts to clean that glitter from the swatches earlier was a pretty feeble one because my hand is still covered in glitter. But this is the shade from the new palette. This is from Huetopian Dream. And now let's take my beloved Mothership Sublime palette and swatch this shade over here, which is also called bronze, but I can't remember what. In terms of formula, the shade from the Sublime palette actually feels less stiff and less flaky compared to the one in Huetopian Dream. The one in Huetopian Dream maybe reminds me a little bit of that copper shade from Midnight Sun in terms of texture. But here is the bronze. Okay, they are super similar to each other. So here is the bronze shade from Sublime, here is the new one. The new one is slightly more subtle and has less of these like honey tones compared to the bronze in the Sublime palette, but I think overall they are super similar to each other, and I doubt that on the eye they're going to be very, very different. So here you go, I was right about these two shades being very similar to each other. Now let's quickly jump into the Mothership 8 Divine Rose 2 palette, because there are a couple of shades that I really want to swatch up against shades from this eyeshadow palette. So first things first, let's swatch this shade here, which is I think called Naked Rose. It is again a more like peachy nude in comparison to Shockwave, which is so much more intense and so much more coral, so that you can see how extremely different they are from each other. So this is the shade, sorry, I should have swatched again the shade from Huetopian first. So this is the shade from Divine Rose 2, and this is the shade from Huetopian Dream, which you can tell is so much more coral. And if you, like me, looked at the original photos of Huetopian Dream and you were like, well, that shade looks exactly like the hot pink from Divine Rose 2, let me show you they have nothing with each other, because the shade from Divine Rose 2 is a true hot pink. Look at that difference. This is so much more cool toned. This is a true coral. This is a bright coral. There's no other way to call it. Next thing, we are going to swatch the two Triochrome shades. So I'm going in with the one from Huetopian Dream, and then I'm going in with the one from the Divine Rose 2 palette, and touching them next to each other. The difference is the metallic shade, the metallic formula from Huetopian Dream feels more impactful, whereas the shade in Mothership 8 is almost more subtle in its texture, so maybe it delivers less impact, and that's one of the reasons she chose to switch up the formula. But these are the two Triochromes next to each other. This is Huetopian Dream, this is Divine Rose 2. You can see Divine Rose 2 has a much cooler duochrome effect in terms of the pink. The flip on this one is much more of like a coral peachy maroon shade, and the dark base is on this side an olive lime, and on this side more of a dark forest green. So let's swatch them next to each other. This is the shade from Divine Rose 2, and this is the shade from Huetopian Dream. Oh wow. So I can kind of understand maybe why she switched to the textures, because the texture of the shade in Huetopian Dream is much more, it delivers more impact in its metallic finish. And just in case you were curious how the deep matte shades compare, so this is the deep matte shade from the Divine Rose 2 palette, which in my opinion is just so much more purple leaning and burgundy compared to the one in Huetopian Dream. So here you have Huetopian Dream, here you have the one from Divine Rose. I'm sorry, I'm switching up the order all the time. This is Huetopian Dream and this is Divine Rose 2. You can see this has a much more a maroon base to it, whereas this one is much more brown in its nature. So these are, I think, all the comparison swatches that I wanted to do versus the Divine Rose 2 palette. Oh, I can maybe quickly swatch one last shade for you. So this is the gold shade from Divine Rose 2, so you can see the difference between the golds. You can see this is so much more like a yellow gold, whereas these two are much more of like that honey neutral orange type of gold. Okay, one quick little comparison that I would like to do with the Divine Rose 1 palette is this shade over here, so the super cool toned matte purpley pink shade next to Secret Eden from the Divine Huetopian Dream palette. So this is Huetopian Dream and this is Divine Rose 1. You can see they're essentially such different shades, because the one from Huetopian Dream, as you can see, is a true dusty rose, whereas the one in Divine Rose 1 almost looks like a grey compared to the one in Huetopian Dream. My goodness, so many Divine Roses, I'm getting confused. Now, the next thing I want to do is actually want to swatch up the matte brown from the Divine Rose 1 shade up against Extreme Plum Noir, because I feel like they are somewhat similar in tone. The shade in mine has a super hard pan for whatever reason. So this is Huetopian Dream, this is Divine Rose 1. The shade from Huetopian Dream indeed has more of those like plummy tones, whereas the shade in Divine Rose 1, first of all, it's like super dry and stiff for whatever reason. It's a much deeper brown, and it's much more true brown compared to this one, which has a bit more of like maroon plum tones to it. I do want to swatch some shades from the Voyeuristic Vixen quad up against shades from the Huetopian Dream palette, and the first one I want to swatch is actually the special multi-chrome type of shade. This is Rose Fire Nectar up against the multi-chrome from Huetopian Dream, because I feel like they're kind of in the same vein. So here you have Huetopian Dream, here you have Rose Fire Nectar, and I think Rose Fire Nectar is like the lighter sister, the one with like a less smoky base compared to Huetopian Dream. But essentially the idea of the Astrals is very similar, because they have this like more warmer golden tone base with like this more corally duochrome to them. So I do feel like while they're different shades, they're very much in line in terms of their tones, and they're probably going to be very nice when you layer them with each other. Now the next shade I want to swatch is, I want to take this bronzy shade from the Voyeuristic Vixen quad and swatch it next to the bronze in Huetopian Dream. I think they're going to be very different. The one in Huetopian Dream is much warmer in tone compared to the one in Voyeuristic Vixen. The one in Voyeuristic Vixen is so much more neutral in tone, and this one is indeed so much more like a chocolate brown. I'm going to enjoy this shade on my lid so much. I love these types of like warm chocolate brown neutrals. Ooh, actually, I think it would be really fun to swatch this shade next to the brown in the Huetopian Dream palette, because they both have these like maroony undertones to them, like warmer, plummy maroony undertones. I think the one from Voyeuristic Vixen is going to be more red toned. So this is Voyeuristic Vixen, and this is Huetopian Dream. This is just a bit more plummy, but they're actually quite similar to each other, as you can tell. Now we're moving a little bit more outside of the motherships. Yeah, we're moving out of the motherships and moving into the quads a little bit. But this is the Dark Star 6-pan, one of the Star Wars eyeshadow palettes. These shades are also in her Celestial Divinity big palette. And I wanted to swatch the bronzy shade up against the bronze from Huetopian Dream, because once again I think they're gonna be very similar with each other. Of course, the textures are completely different, because one is a metallic and one is a flaky topper type of shade. Okay, the shade from the Dark Star is again a bit more like that honey, whereas this is more neutral in tone. But that said, they are still relatively similar to each other. Grabbing my Eternal Eden quad, where I would like to swatch this neutral, more mauve-toned matte shade up against Secret Eden, and I do think that the one from the Eternal Eden is probably cooler in tone and more reminiscent of the one from Divine Rose 1, but still. So here we have Huetopian Dream, and I'm swatching them like shit. So here we have Huetopian Dream, and here we have the shade from Eternal Eden. They are very similar to each other, but as you can see, this one leans more neutral in tone and more like dusty, whereas this one is cooler and more like mauve purple with a gray base to it. So I can't really think of anything that's quite similar to Astral Amethyst Moon, so I'm not even going to try to find anything similar. But the Astral Venusian Orchid, I don't think they're going to be similar, but I want to swatch them side by side, because I think they're going to, at the very least, have a very similar texture and a very similar duochrome. And that is this shade here from the Ritualistic Rose Quad, which has a more like light baby pink base to it, but I feel like the duochrome is very similar to the one in Venusian Orchid, in that it's, or maybe it's not. The one in Venusian Orchid is much more of a lime, and this is much more of a gold. And I feel like the one in Huetopian Dream is also much more flaky and more textured. So this is the one in Ritualistic Rose, and this is Venusian Orchid. So you're actually getting very, very different shades, because this has a much cooler base, like it's a lavender base, and the duochrome is more of a lime green than it is a true gold. And I think the last comparison I want to do is between, was going to be probably one of my favorite shades in this palette, the shade Cosmic Bloom over here, the one that I put on my lid first. And I want to compare it to a shade that's probably not going to be similar, but I think they're somewhat similar in vibe, and that is the shade Pale Fire, which can originally be found in her La Vie and Rose 6-pan. I have it both in the 6-pan as well as in a single, because it's one of my favorites. So this shade has also like that peachy pink flip to it, but of course it's going to be very different from the shade in the new palette, because the shade in the new palette is much more metallic, much more impactful, whereas this shade from Pale Fire is much more of like a satin. But let's swatch them next to each other. So this is Pale Fire, like I said, one of my favorites, and this is the new shade. They do have that peachy pink flip going to them, but I think the new shade has a much warmer coral red tone to it compared to this one, which is a bit cooler in tone. And I can't believe we have actually completed the comparison swatch party. If I forgot something, please do let me know. I will try to leave like comparison swatches on my community tab. If there's something that you would like to see compared live, I can even do it in one of my next videos. Just let me know what you would like to see. I wanted to once again reiterate that I am not at the least disappointed in this palette. I think it's different enough. It fits very well into her lineup. I think it is exactly what you would expect of Pat McGrath. You have the neutrals, the interesting flips, but you also have the party shades, and I'm so happy that it's not another pink palette. 10 out of 10. So I cannot wait to do more looks with it, to incorporate it a lot in my pet pairing videos, because I can tell you that Venusian Orchid shade is going to look bomb layered over top of a bunch of other things, and I cannot wait to layer it over a bunch of other things. I think I already made my thoughts about the Intensifeyes product pretty clear. It was very interesting to try it for 5 extra euros, because that's how much the kit cost. It was 140, whereas the eyeshadow palette was 135, which is something I started off with in the beginning of the video, and I never went back to that because I'm such a scatterbrain. But that's what I wanted to say. I tried it, I really wanted to compare it to Pixie Epoxy, and as I expected, they are a pretty similar product, only the delivery method is somewhat different. So you can pick and choose which one you want. If you can get this whole set, then you're definitely getting a very good deal on the pen. If you already have this palette, let me know what you think about it. I cannot wait to chat about it in my comment section with you. As usual, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!